If you're a hip pro gamer like me, then you probably saw Microsoft's announcement that it will be acquiring Activision Blizzard. To many, this might sound exciting. Master Chief in Overwatch? Blizzard games on Battle Pass? The possibility that Blizzard employees can do their jobs in an environment that isn't characterized by humiliating sexual harassment and egregiously toxic workplace conditions? Sounds awesome, right? As exciting as the future possibilities of many beloved franchises may be, the implications of corporations amassing so much power and wealth go much further than the development process of Diablo 4. Let's have a look at monopolies, how they came about, and what monopolization means for industries of all kinds. A monopoly implies an exclusive possession of a market by a supplier of a product or service for which there is no substitute. In other words, it is when one company has all of a thing and has no competition when selling that thing. We see this with food companies like PepsiCo, home of everyone's second favorite cola, and many hundreds more acquired brands. We see this with Facebook, Meta, now owning Instagram, WhatsApp, Oculus VR, and dozens more. And we see this with Microsoft, which of course holds a large portion of the PC market thanks to its Windows operating system, but also owns every single program you'd ever use at a desk job and countless game studios. Activision Blizzard now soon to be included. All of these companies own countless brands, giving them exclusive rights to produce and sell the many products which accompany them. What acquiring a new company or brand means for the owners and executives of monopolies is more profit, more business, and more power. For workers of the acquired company, it means potentially having to answer to a new boss, a change in the terms of their role, or in some cases being laid off and in need of a new job. It can mean any number of things for the consumers of the acquired company's product or service, but either way, profit is the priority of the incoming company, whether or not that's a benefit to the consumer. Bewilderingly giant companies like these are becoming the norm globally, all of which possess an extraordinary amount of wealth and resources, therefore possessing an extraordinary amount of power. We're living in a time with a rapidly growing number of megacorporations whose products and services we rely on for communication, entertainment, transport, food, and almost anything else as far as the eye can see. Most of us get our groceries from multinational supermarket chains rather than a local farmer's market. Most of us probably hate our mobile service providers, but there's a good chance the other 2 or 3 telco companies that exist in your country have equally poor reputations. Having been born in 1995, I've grown up around corporations like this, and there's a good chance you have too. Many of us are now wondering, how did we get here? In the 17th century, when capitalism was still just a baby and monarchs were mostly still in charge, monopoly was defined as an allowance by the king to any person or corporate for the sole buying, selling, making, working, or using anything, whereby any person or corporate are sought to be restrained of any freedom or liberty that they had before. In other words, if the king declares Squire Simon's Spinach Emporium a monopoly, it is the only business allowed to sell spinach in all the land, and no one can stop Simon from selling his spinach. Jump forward to 1800s USA, where there's no longer kings, but monopolies are certainly taking form. You had Andrew Carnegie's Steel Company, which thanks to technological advancements in steel production and criminally low wages paid to employees, made an enormous profit which allowed him to purchase numerous neighboring steel mills and corner the market for steel production. You had John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, which by 1890 had grown so large that it controlled 88% of the refined oil flow in the United States. You also had the American Tobacco Company, which came to dominate the tobacco industry by acquiring over 200 competitors. These companies and hundreds like them emerged at this time, all garnering a reputation for polluting local environments, price gouging customers, and appalling working conditions. As you can see, the practice of large businesses absorbing numerous smaller ones to become monopolies isn't a new thing, but there was a time when government exercised its power to do something about it. That time was 1890, when American legislators passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. Many companies then, and now, are placed in what is called a trust, which is a legal entity such as a company that is employed to hold property, making assets held within the trust more secure than what they would be in the hands of an individual or single company. The effect of having countless companies under the protection of a single trust is an extreme amount of wealth and power in the hands of a small number of people. This allows them to snuff out local businesses that have no chance of competing in the market, leading to these businesses being bought up and absorbed into the larger entity. This takes power and money away from small businesses, which then no longer have influence in the community, and consumers, who now have little or no choice of where or for how much they purchase goods or services from the monopoly. Laws like the Sherman Antitrust Act were created as a way to combat powerful trusts. These laws gave government the authority to break up large companies that were found to be monopolistic, redistributing the wealth and power of the monopoly back to a collection of smaller companies. It was under this law that the 3 previously mentioned companies were dissolved, after a mounting public outcry over the unfair and predatory business practices they engaged in. For a while, the pushback against monopolies seemed to be working, but sadly all good things must come to an end. Even though the Sherman Act gave government some power to combat monopolies, it still wasn't enough to fix the power imbalance that weighed in favor of these businesses. The problem with antitrust laws is that they can only really be used to narrowly go after specific industries, making them effective against a company like Standard Oil, but less so against, say, a banking monopoly or other forms of financial holding companies. This led to several businesses continuing to gain extraordinary power from the 1910s well into the 1930s, quickly gaining far more influence over industries and the government than citizens, leading people at the time to lose nearly all faith in democracy. Eventually, this era saw the majority of wealth and political power in the hands of 4 families and their associated companies: the DuPonts, the Mellons, the Morgans, and the Rockefellers. It wasn't until the aftermath of the Great Depression in the early 1930s that government decided to once again crack down on the monopolistic practices that directly led to this crisis, creating new laws that could effectively combat corporate power. Over the course of about 10 years, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his administration moved to break up many large banks, industries, and utility companies, while also implementing strong labor rights in order to give power back to many workers. These policies made great strides to take away the influence of big businesses and push back against the rise of monopolies. But once again, these changes didn't go far enough and were vulnerable to being reversed. It was in the mid to late 1970s that this ended up happening, when a majority of US politicians decided to embrace a philosophy of cooperating with monopolies, getting rid of many regulations which stopped businesses from growing out of control. In this era, we see chain stores like Walmart and Home Depot beginning to sweep across the country to dominate their respective markets, a trend that emerged in many other countries throughout the globe soon after. This philosophy has continued into our modern day, not just in the US, but in numerous other capitalist countries. We all see the headlines. Here's what Disney owns after the massive Disney-Fox merger. The $71.3 billion deal, now complete, continues a new terrifying era in this media consolidation. Or, Take-Two Interactive to buy Farmville creator Zynga for $12.7 billion. Or Elon Musk to buy France for undisclosed amount. The growing number of megacorporations not only diminishes the choices we have as consumers, but the power we have as voters and as workers. This is because politicians are far more inclined to listen to the concerns from CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies than those of wage earners, who in their minds aren't as important as industry leaders. This is why environmental activists are ignored in favor of highly profitable fossil fuel company executives. This is why Amazon's treatment of workers continues to go unchecked, even with the constant nightmares the PR department has to face. This is why tech companies keep expanding, gaining more and more influence over the way we communicate and invading our privacy. Because somewhere along the line, a bunch of people watched RoboCop and decided megacorporations controlling large swaths of society was pretty cool, entirely missing the point of RoboCop. If our rights as workers are stripped away, with every local business being consumed by Big Etc. Incorporated, then we have little choice of where to work and little grounds on which we can challenge poor workplace conditions. We aren't yet at a point where all small to medium businesses have entirely disappeared, but every day it looks like an increasingly possible reality. So what can we do about it? As individuals, you can support local businesses for certain products or services, to the extent that they still exist where you live. This is a good step, which I support, but aside from that, there unfortunately isn't much we can do on an individual level. Monopolies are a form of collective power, which is by nature something an individual can't possess. The power of monopolies comes from the immense wealth generated by a collection of businesses and industries, so there's very little that a McDonald's worker can do to push back against poor workplace treatment. But if even half of the 200,000 workers that McDonald's employs globally stood up against their workplace conditions, now we'd be getting somewhere. All that we can do as citizens, workers, and small business owners is to organize together and create our own block of collective power and advocate for our own interests via unions, strikes, and protests. Without an organized and dedicated group of people pushing back against corporate power, the wealth of monopolies will always outweigh the wealth of individuals. Creating and maintaining a movement isn't easy, especially with many governments firmly siding with corporate interests. But it's the only way to claw back the power held by these industries. Monopolies aren't going away anytime soon. Disney will probably keep buying more studios. Microsoft will probably keep acquiring more franchises, and companies like them will continue to expand as much as they're allowed to. It's important that we are aware of the growing influence that corporations have over our lives, because it may seem harmless when a game studio purchases a collection of franchises, but it becomes far more serious when a drug company is the sole producer of a life-saving medication and is able to dictate their own terms for its sale. This is the world we live in. Do we want to take back the power held by corporations? Or should we accept that we must one day embrace Jeff Bezos as supreme CEO of Earth? The choice is ours. Choose Jeff.